Have a Coffee with Survivors. Audra and Roman inviting guests and holding space to discuss the healing journey to reunite with our true selves.
We see you, we hear you. Welcome to Coffee with Survivors, our safe place.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm so excited. I want to get rid of those patterns. It's kind of like wearing coats, one coat over the other, and every time you take a coat off, you find another pattern. So my pattern is I need that coffee every morning. I'm very serious about that. But my next change is, since I'm aware that that negative pattern caused me high blood pressure, I'm going to change my pattern and use decaffeinated coffee.
Just so tell yourself it's caffeinated.
Exactly.
It's all a mind game, Roman.
I see many people are, who's watching us here. Are we alone or something? Hi everyone, where are you guys from? How about you guys share in the comments where you're coming from, where you're watching from? And of course, if you have any questions, what we're talking about today, just post in the comments. Audra,
Roman,
I'm so excited having you here today. It's always a change. Last time we did our show, there were lots of good comments. But I feel every time we do the show, I learn a lot.
I do too.
We itemize these things. We kind of make an overview. We look into things, and then we share our experience, and then we kind of also discuss how we got there. Like each one of us have a different approach to how we solve problems and how we deal with our trauma and how we deal with our relationships, for example, what we're going to discuss today. And I feel it's an important part, not only to discuss the problems and kind of come from an angle of like, oh, poor me, you know, I screwed up my relationships, but we should come in from an angle of healing aspect and moving on and making changes.
Definitely. I think that talking about things helps release it from your body, but I totally agree with you in the fact that we need to like come up with some solutions so that we can move forward instead of just doing the loop.
Right. I totally agree. Now, what are the dynamics in those traumatic bonds that we create? Like, I wasn't a womanizer. I didn't have a lot of relationships. My relationships were very limited. But I see there were dynamics in those bonds. What was your dynamics?
Do you want to throw up that first slide? I think it'll give everybody an idea of kind of where we're going.
Oops, that was not the right one. I'll find it. I need glasses.
Here you go.
No, that is not. What is it? Oh, here we go.
Okay, the dynamics of trauma bonds. Trauma bonds are relationships where we repeat the same dynamics we experienced in childhood with a parent through a romantic partner or a close friend. So in my experience with trauma bonds, I experienced abandonment when I was young. So especially in my male relationships, I tended to attract partners that were going to play that out, the abandonment part of it. Or also I had a lot of trauma around that created a lot of self-worth issues on my end. So I would attract partners that were going to validate that low self-worth to me. And so a trauma bond to me is basically when we experience trauma as a child, we are going to continuously repeat that relationship with friends or significant others because we want to heal that wound, and we don't realize that we can't heal that wound within another relationship. It has to be healed within ourselves. So it's very bizarre how we continue to seek out that trauma bond relationship that's going to play itself out. Like for me with my abandonment, the relationship would always kind of end with me being abandoned. I think a lot of times we seek those relationships out too on a subconscious level because they're predictable. We know how they're going to end. There's no surprise. And it also, unfortunately, it's what we're used to. So even though we want to experience something different, we kind of don't know how to experience something different until we figure out that we're getting involved in trauma bonds.
Guess who would have?
Did we lose her?
No, we here. We got her here. She's all there.
Hi, Siara. She's looking like she's not quite connected. Hi.
How are you doing
In
there?
the middle of difficulties figuring out how to get these to connect. It might have.
You're doing just good.
I am in Montana this week, and as there's free-range children out here, so I kind of have to keep an eye on both. I hope that's going to be okay with everybody.
You know what? Life still happens,
Anyway,
Siara. We're all okay with it.
There we go.
We're
okay, good. Yeah, but I really wanted to be here for this. I think this is a really important conversation for people to have. Like you said, when we don't know any better, we really tend to seek out those relationship habits and patterns. Or in my case, I was kind of opposite of you, and I was more of the leaver than the left. And because it terrified me that people would leave me. And so I kind of had the opposite internal setting, I suppose you can say. And I acted on that a lot in my 20s. And then after my best friend committed suicide, I was awful for like a year or two. Let's be honest, it's probably 2 years.
I think that that's common though, Siara. I think that when people have experienced trauma and abandonment, they definitely will run before they get hurt.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. I'm sorry, I'm really confused why my computer keeps telling me that it's turning my sound off out here.
We can hear you.
I'm going to try to okay, good. So I'm going to ignore that little symbol then.
Yeah, ignore it.
Perfect.
We can totally hear you.
Good. And I can hear you guys, so that works for me.
If you both heads up, we're losing you.
Good. Yeah, give me the wave. By the way, we can't hear you.
This is code word for we can't hear you.
Perfect. Your mouth is moving, and I can't hear sound.
Yeah.
It's all good. Oh, here we go. I want to make this big for me.
I wanted to bring up too that it's not always childhood trauma that causes us to repeat patterns, trauma bond patterns in relationships. Later in life, if you experience trauma as an adult, it can cause thoughts of not being able to trust people or beliefs. You know, if you start creating beliefs around the trauma that you experience as an adult, there's a lot of issues with trust that come into play. And that can also cause you to create trauma bonds and have difficulty in relationships and experiencing trust and intimacy and stuff like that that goes along with a significant other relationship. I know for myself, I don't necessarily say I would have trauma bond friendships, I think that most of my trauma bonds have to do with male relationships, but I do recognize in my female relationships that I have a lot of fear sometimes that if I'm honest about how I feel, or I lay down boundaries, that my friends are going to abandon me. Like, I still, even though I haven't had experience really with that, with friends abandoning me, it's purely a fear of being abandoned. So a lot of times, like if I express myself to a really close girlfriend, I'll have irrational thoughts instantly, and probably for until I recognize that they're just nothing more than irrational thoughts, that friend's gonna abandon me, that they're gonna get mad at me, they're not gonna understand where I'm coming from, and they're gonna say I'm out. It's never happened though, like, but yet my thoughts still go there sometimes.
I would totally agree with you on that. There could be several ways of having those trauma coming in. So we can have like two different layers. Can have a childhood trauma that comes in from the parent relationship that has been transmitted over to our adult relationships. But also it can happen that additional traumas come on top of that or parallel to that, depending on what's happening. Like going with the wrong relationship, and while you're trying to recover from your child trauma, then an accident happens, and then you have a new trauma that is not related to your childhood, an accident, for example, and then that can add, or for example, an assault or a death can cause all these traumas, and all of a sudden the whole thing changes. Many times we hear, "I will never get married again. I will never go into a relationship again after something traumatic happened." Um, so just a heads up, just for me to be easy to function here. Oh, that's much better, Siara. That headphones works perfect.
It's broken. I wasn't gonna use it, but it's good enough.
So from my experience, I'm coming from a childhood relationship trauma. My parents have been married several times, and my father basically, and I was being moved around through the countries, and from my father first relationship into his second marriage, me moving to my grandparents, then moving to a how do you call this, home, like a school home. We call it
Like
internat.
a boarding school?
Yeah, boarding school, right? Which was a Roman Catholic boarding school, like priests and all this stuff. um, I always had a problem with building relationships, not only with friends, but also with intimate relationships after that. I was seeking my imaginary perfect mother because I grew up basically without my mother. Um, because I had this illusion how my perfect mother would look like. And so I would use my relationship, or I would use the parents of my relationship to gain that self-esteem back, or I am being appreciated. So I would do everything possible in my power to be liked. Like I would be the perfect son-in-law, I would be the perfect guy for my girlfriend just to fit that concept. So basically I had no personal life. Everything was created around that fear of, if I do this, how would they think about me if I do that? So I would always try to find and read people's mind how they would like me to be. So I was very flexible. I would be,
So it sounds like you put on a lot of masks
oh yeah,
to show up and be the person that
right,
you felt the person in front of you needed you to be, rather than allowing yourself to be authentic. And
exactly. So I was different on my job. I was different at home. I was different with friends. I was different with my father and in-laws. I was different with my parents. And then basically what you do is all of a sudden you disassociate who you really are, and then you avoid relationships that know you. So you distance yourself because you don't want to go to that fear space. You're creating your own world around that, and you don't want to go back where you were before. And then you hear words like small trigger words that have a whole impact. For example, my grandparents would call me with money, which was a representative for Roman, but my grandfather was named Roman, so I was the young child. So calling me by my name that my grandparents called me was already a trigger because I didn't want to be that child that had to go through this process. So I tried to get out of my house as quickly as possible to create my own world and my own reality that I had no clue how to work with because my parents didn't give me that example. So I created a false reality. How do people live? How do people create? And all of a sudden, as soon as that bond become stronger and that bond become kind of like a safe place, then I turned against that bond because I felt into that pattern that people who love you mistreat you, and then I become passive aggressive. Anything that came out of their mouth, even if that was good meant. So as soon as I create a bond with a relationship, then I become passive aggressive because it had to match my picture I had from my parents. And I think that pattern just rolled over into next relationship. And so I moved from Austria, I went to Greece, basically escaping those patterns, and I went straight into the same patterns again, just in a different language, in a different country. And yeah, but Siara, what was your Audra? What do you guys think about that? Can you kind of associate with that, or our viewers? Do you guys can associate with that kind of experience?
I definitely have gone through my periods where I was attempting, in the best fashion I knew how, to be what I thought other people wanted me to be. I definitely tried to put on some professional hats and to be that person that keeps, a 9-to-5 job and works in the professional realm and, amongst other things. And I tried to be a perfect girlfriend for a long time. In various ways. I was kind of raised in drug culture. So my initial relationships in my teens and early 20s, coming out of my parents' home where a lot of things were acceptable that really aren't acceptable. I really struggled to establish what was normal because my yardstick just from birth was really broken. And so yeah, I do relate a lot with that. I also went through a lot of, I had subconsciously attracted and had relationships with people that had really abundant family lives or friendships because I was not capable of building those types of communities around me and that type of support. And so I tended to date people that had those things already in place. And then I would really participate in that with those people while we were dating. And then when I broke up with the person, I broke up with everybody. Like nobody that came with that person could still be my friend. And so I honestly trashed a lot of really good relationships in that way, because for me, it was very black or white thinking for a long time. And as soon as like one big problem became apparent in a relationship with anybody, friends, romantic partners, family, I immediately assumed they were against me. And it wasn't like we were enemies. It was just kind of like Audra was saying, like that terror of being abandoned. And so I would be the person who kind of went ahead and drove the rest of the wedge into that crack that had started, rather than being somebody that had figured out how to reconnect us. That took a long time. And it was actually not until I had a boyfriend that I was on and off with for about 10 years. And we are now best friends still. And it wasn't until I had like broken up with him for maybe the 50 millionth time that one of his friends said something that really kind of like planted a seed in my brain. And she was like, we're still your friends when you break up with Mike. And I was like, but how? You guys grew up together. Like, you guys have been friends for a million years. I'm always in and out with him. Like, how could you possibly be my friend? Like, you know, and he and I took turns being bad to each other, you know, like one time we'd get together and I'd be the awful person. And then another time we'd get together and he'd be the one. And like, we really like, crashed against each other for years and years. I mean, I dated this guy before and after my marriage and having Unity. And so anyways, but when she said that, it was a profound moment for me. I had never considered that these people were actually my friend, and they weren't just hanging out with me because of who I was with, you know? And so that was a big moment that kind of started me towards my own healing, with friendships and being able to open up to building new friendships, which I was not particularly good at in my early 20s, probably all the way until my mid 20s, when I started to read an insane amount of books on what being a friend meant and communication and self-help books. And because I wanted to give my daughter a better life. So yeah, anyways.
What are the red flags that you look backwards you didn't see on those relationships?
As soon as we had sex, it was like you had depressed a self-destruct button. That was basically it. Kind of coming back.
You insert the self-destruction button.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, yeah, that was it. Intimacy was definitely a trigger for me, and I didn't realize it in the beginning. But being intimate with somebody, even though I know we talked about in our last conversation, I didn't really believe that, you know, sex came with intimacy per se. It was still an intimate act, and generally I wasn't able to process through a lot of the things that had happened. And yeah, and so that was a big one. Anytime we would have, if I had a disagreement with a partner about like something I would consider at the time, and believe me, this was very fluid from like moment to moment, year to year, whatever I decided in that exact moment was the cause or idea or concept that was like, this is it, this is my foundational premise, you know, like, oh, we don't get along on whether or not people should be allowed to own guns. Like, let's just use like a really big hot button topic for society. And I'd be like, oh, we don't get along on this. Oh, this is definitely a game ender. Like, we can't date. Like, and it would just be ridiculous things, to be honest. I don't know that it was very consistent.
You were looking for reasons to get out before you got hurt.
Yes, I was looking for reasons to be the reason that I left, so that they didn't have to leave me. I felt like I was saving us all the bother, you know. Then they didn't have to feel bad for being a terrible person. I could take all the blame, and I was in control of when the leaving happened.
So it was kind of like, I want to control the relationship so I can blame myself for failing into the relationship and going back into my old patterns, because all relationships have to fail, because I am a result of a failure.
Yes. And it was almost like I was seeking to confirm that I was unlovable, and that I was going to be ultimately on my own throughout this life, and that people were just temporary. You know, like other people were just like shooting stars through your lives. And it didn't really occur to me that you stayed in people's lives. Kind of like you, Roman, my family moved a lot. You know, at one point my mom was running with like biker clubs. And so like every 2 weeks we were in another state, and you know, they just kind of plopped me in the middle of two adults with like this big, like bulbous thing. And we'd drive for 12 hours on a bike, you know, like, and then my mom eventually married a Vietnam veteran who had severe PTSD. And he would just rant, like sometimes you just show up at home and there'd be like 2 boxes sitting in your bedroom, and he'd be like, we're moving in 2 hours. If it doesn't fit in your 2 boxes, it doesn't come with us, you know? And even though we kind of moved around the same community, it was still really disjointing to just move houses all the time. And I had just moved in with them when I was 10, and by the time I was 12, we'd already been in like 4 or 5 houses, you know, and moved from Colorado to Montana. Like, yeah, so I was definitely seeking to control like the leaving, and I thought that was kind of my place in life. You know, I was going to be like a rambling man, you know, that song.
So,
Because I'm a rambling man.
so what are the red flags?
Red flags we don't see. We enter trauma bonds because we interpret familiar behaviors as intense sexual attraction or chemistry. We are always unconsciously seeking to relive our past because our mind and body can predict events, even if these events were painful, miserable, or terrifying. Red flags will be attraction plus not obvious because we learned love meant lack of safety and predictability. So I think that in the experiences that, like Roman, what you shared, and Siara, that you shared, I think that all those red flags, I don't know if the listeners could see them because we hadn't looked at the slide, but I could see them all over in your story. So like with you, Siara, like when you were dating these people and you feeling like their friends were just being friends with you because you were dating them and not understanding the fact that they still wanted to be your friend afterwards, I think is kind of a result of the pattern of you never being in one place long enough to actually build solid, long-lasting friendships. So you didn't even know what that looked like.
No, I had no idea. And even so, like right now, this beautiful place that you're looking at, this is my friend Kendra's home. And we've been friends. Well, I count it since we were 15, and she counts it since we were 16. But that's because I had decided she was going to be my friend, and it took me a year to convince her. She's got some trauma too. But even our friendship, you know, we've been friends now for 22 years, and the initial phases of our friendship were really kind of in and out of each other's lives. And it wasn't until the last maybe decade that our friendship actually really solidified into something that we both really like rely on wholeheartedly. You know, it's not something that we can live without anymore. And it took me a long time, even though there were people in my life, present in my life, that kind of moved in and out. I couldn't see that they were still permanent fixtures, even after a decade, you know, and I'm still very slow to make friends. Roman's beautiful wife, Barbara, I've known her for 5 years, and I would say that our friendship really didn't open up for me into the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, even though it's been almost 5 years that we've known each other and been hanging out every summer, you know? So I still like to watch people. I still take my time getting to know people, because once I put my faith and my trust in somebody, what I've learned about myself is that now I trust the people that I bring in, and I trust when I decide that I have a friend. But I am very slow to decide that that's going to happen, you know, even to this day. And part of that trauma bonding, and part of that is also just knowing that I have enough friendships that my cup is full, and so I'm not feeling lack or need in my life anymore.
Yeah. When you make a decision to allow someone into your life, you're taking a risk, because everybody's human and everybody makes mistakes. And sometimes people are meant to leave our life. So, I mean, but then we miss out if we don't take that risk and allow people in. Then we miss out on what that person has to offer us. And we also miss out on giving what we have to offer that other person. So, but I can, like when you would break up with somebody and you would break up with all the friends too, it was like,
Burning bridges.
Yeah, I think I burned tons of bridges in relationships in my life, and it actually is a trauma response. It's kind of disassociating with anything that is a reminder of something that made you not feel good inside. So it's an avoidance tactic. So basically, before you're confronted with uncomfortable feelings or a reminder of something that was painful for you, you burn the bridge as a way to avoid having to confront those
Oh
feelings.
yeah. And you never go back and talk to those people or work through it or deal with it. I mean, I think I was like 28 before I started calling people and being like, hey, you know what? I think that the way that this ended was really awful. And I need to tell you, you know, why you were awful to me, like kind of have a righteous anger towards a person that had wronged me, which I had never done until I was about, 27, 28. And had righteous anger, was like, hey, what you did really affected me and it wasn't okay. And I need you to understand that like what you did to this day is still affecting some of the decisions I made. And I need you to know that you hurt me. And then get into those conversations and also apologize for what I did that hurt those people. And that was a skill that was incredibly difficult for me to learn, like incredibly difficult, that you can work through things. And now I'm in a partnership where, Eric and I don't get along on music or kids' names. Like picking Celeste's name was incredibly difficult. Like there's some things that we don't get along. We don't always see eye to eye in politics and stuff like that. And the beautiful thing is allowing all of that growth and those new tools to come into this current relationship, and to allow this other person that I'm with to really be who they are and to be human for me, and to allow myself to be human for them, and to not try like you and I, Roman, like to try to fit into a perfect mold for him, and to allow myself to have a disagreement and be like, no, you're not going to change my mind on this. Like, I'm not going to capitulate just to end this disagreement that we're having, but maybe we need to agree to disagree and allow each other the grace to be who we are, And so there is a treasure at the end of the rainbow, though.
Yeah, I noticed like when you're talking about your relationship with Eric, and Roman, what you had talked about at first, how you put on all these masks and showed up as how you felt the person in front of you needed to show up because you wanted to be loved. I recognize that the relationships that I had before I went through therapy were very much like that. I constantly put on masks, not just for like a dating relationship, but for any relationship. I put on masks and presented as who I felt they wanted me or needed me to be, because I wanted to feel loved. And then I would end up walking away and living my life still feeling unloved because I wasn't showing people who I really was. So I wasn't authentically being loved because they didn't even know me. All they knew was the masks that I was putting on. So after I went through therapy, I've been through some dating experiences since then, completely different experiences than before I started therapy. I have learned a lot through my relationships, and I still recognize, like, even after I went through therapy, I was still on some level picking out people that couldn't show up for me. And they weren't bad people. They just, like, everybody's trying to work through their stuff, and some people have more awareness than others. And I think in your, like, coming to your relationship, Siara, and also yours too, Roman, like when you find a partner, that you don't have to be completely healed to find a good relationship. Yeah. That is, if you're telling yourself that you're not lovable until you're completely healed, that is a great big fat lie. I'm going to write that. That needs to be diminished. That's a lie. You can still meet somebody and have a wonderful relationship even when you yourself or the other person isn't fully healed. What happens is you need to find somebody that is able to show up and hold space for you as you're healing, and you need to be able to hold space for them as they're healing. And I think that, you know, when you find somebody that's capable of doing that, you navigate through the other issues, like what you were talking about, Siara. You guys don't always see eye to eye. You don't agree on everything, but you're showing up as your authentic self, and he's showing up as his authentic self, and you learn how to still commingle and love each other as you are, and hold space for one another to heal. And I really feel like with all the work that I've done, I'm in that space. I'm in that space where I can be present to let someone show up completely as they are. We have a question.
I'd actually like to point out that this concept that we have to be fully healed to be in a good partnership, not only is it self-defeating because you feel unlovable, as you were pointing out, but I feel like it's a misnomer, and it's a really big play towards that happily ever after, where nothing's ever going to touch your relationship again. No trauma is ever going to come in again. And then people feel that when a trauma or a bad experience comes in and disrupts everything, that somehow their relationship has failed, or that they have failed. And they take it inside themselves as a form of shame and guilt, and of not being successful in that relationship pattern. And I think that's a big disservice, not only to ourselves, but to everybody around us, to hold that belief. And it's the underlying belief underneath that it's that unspoken belief below that, you know, when I'm fully healed and I'm in the right relationship, everything's going to work out for me. That's not how it works. You know, I mean, just last year, Eric and I had a miscarriage in January where I almost died. That really offset us really heavily. Yeah, Roman and you and Barbara were a big part of that. Thank you for holding space for us. And, you know, and then in the spring, we almost lost our kids' grandmother from cancer. And then in the fall, their mother was diagnosed with cancer, and we almost lost her twice last year. I had huge health issues living in a home with black mold. I mean, when you start laying out all the things that just happened to Eric and I last year, you know, we had a son that was being tremendously bullied in school that we were trying to deal with. It really upset our apple cart. Let's be honest. You know, we spilled almost all of our apples out of our apple cart last year. There was moments last year where we were concerned we weren't going to be able to hold our relationship together. And there was big moments where we had to sit down and we had to have conversations that this isn't failure in our healing process, that we are experiencing these big emotions around being human with all of these traumas happening all at once in one 365-day period. You know, like that was all just from January to December last year. And the thing is, though, is that we had to come back to that space of common healing and core healing, and allow each other to go off and kind of lick our own wounds, and then come back together again and reformulate a plan to come back in connection. And we would not have been able to do that had we continued to hold that core belief inside of ourselves that once we came into divine partnership together, that everything was just going to work out and be all right. You know, like it's not going to be happily ever after. It's going to be happily right now, and maybe tomorrow it's going to be a mess. But it's all going to be okay.
Well,
I think you just answered the question that was up, Siara. The question was, is there such a thing as divine partner, the one that stays throughout everything, the one best friend? And I think you just answered that beautifully. I think that sometimes we get this happily ever after picture in our head, like we need to be totally healed to meet our right person. And then when we meet our right person, it's going to be like this fairy tale. But the reality is that life is constantly happening. There's always an ebb and flow to life. And it's finding a partner that is capable of, like you said, you guys recognized that you needed a chance to kind of be here. Like sometimes you're here, sometimes you're here, and it's okay that you guys are right here licking your own wounds. It doesn't mean the relationship is failing. It means that you guys are processing through your stuff individually. And then as you process individually and start healing, you start coming back together again. It's a matter of finding a partner that's capable of doing that with you.
Yeah. And it's a matter of trusting yourself too, and deciding to stay with somebody when it's the right time to stay. And I don't know how to describe that, because I've, in many of my relationships, thought it was the right one. But it truly, truly is different this time with this partner. You know, with Eric, it is very much sometimes we go through moments where we both want to still run away. Like last year, we had several of those big moments where both of us were like, that's it. We can't do this. You know, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. And, but then coming back to find that core togetherness, that best friendness, as, you know, the question states, to being, what would I do for my best friend if they were going through this? Would I impose myself on them? Would I decide what their right healing path was? How would I actually treat a friend? If this person wasn't my partner, how would I be treating them if they were just my best friend? Or not just, but what if they were my best friend? And sometimes the answer is very different. And it's hard sometimes to step back and be like, I need to approach this and allow my partner the grace of a more friendly approach, I guess you could say, rather than a romantic approach.
Well, we have to see that we have different types of relationships. So we have our parent relationships, as a family relationship. Then we have our friends, and we have strangers. And so I recognize over the years that we are beings incarnated, that we learn through our reflection. And our reflection comes in from our relationships. I relate myself to my work, to my car, to my dogs, to my friends, to my family, to my neighbors, to strangers. Just saying, hello, how are you doing? And the other person, like, it's already a relationship interaction that triggers. So basically, we're going through all the relationships by being triggered. We are triggered to reevaluate how we express ourselves towards our environment. I don't want to go religious, but from my belief system, I feel the creation is a reflection of how it interacts with itself. Like there is constant interaction. And if I go extremely, I said, well, God created because he wants to see who he is. I am that I am in that context. So when we look further down,
hey, kind of off topic, but to run and grab my charger. I am going to be offline for about a hot second because my computer's about to die. Okay, I'll be right back.
Yeah. And so I recognize that all those triggers made me become better. So I started evaluating all the relationships, the good ones, the bad ones, the forever relationships with my parents. I cannot avoid that. We are family either way. And even if I disconnected from them, that disconnection is a trigger itself. And then we have our friends. And when I met Audra and Siara at the same time, I see how they changed over those periods of times, and our relationship changed. So we're going through changes of our relationships because we are changing, and sometimes the relationships are temporary, kind of like tangents. We come together to change, and then we move away from it. So we don't need to cry about it. We don't need to hang into it for longer than it's necessary. We have to admit that this relationship I called in for myself, my higher self, and there must be something like an arrangement between our higher selves. It says, hey, I need you and you guys merge together because you guys need each other, because we need to deal with it. And it could be an ancestor's trauma that we need to work on. It could be a generation trauma. It could be just an individual trauma. We don't know. So we cannot judge those relationships and classify them as good, as bad, if we're not seeing the essence of it and where we learn from it.
I get what you're saying, Roman. I've had a lot of very painful dating experiences. And yet at the same time, even though I experienced a lot of pain, I have so much gratitude because each one of those relationships has taught me something and has helped me grow. It's helped me recognize something in myself that I wanted to heal. It's helped me evolve as a human and as a soul. And I am in such a better space because of them. I am in a space where I am all those relationships have helped me meet myself on some level. And even though it was painful, I was able to do my own self-worth work and learn my self-worth and learn how to love myself, because I was picking out relationships where it was not validating my self-worth or self-love, because I didn't have self-worth and self-love. And so all those relationships were teaching me about where I was failing myself, basically. And so the last couple of years going through therapy and the book writing process, like, I have really learned a lot, and my self-worth has really gone way up, and I have learned how to love myself. And so that better prepares me to be in a healthy relationship with someone where I can actually fully love them and allow them to fully love me with no masks on, me, the real authentic me. And if I hadn't had those past experiences that people would consider failures, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So are they really failures? No, they're not. Were they painful? Yes, but I've grown tremendously. I think it's all in perspective how people want to look at it.
Well, we see that throughout those relationships, we go into fight, flight, freeze response until we wake one time and it says, I'm more and better than that. It's not about the survival mode, it's about communicating. And so going through the process of flirting into a relationship and recognizing our value comes from within us, and it's not because of the other person. This is where we start giving the other person room to grow as well. So I think if we're going into these rigid negative beliefs about the relationships, we have to recognize that we're causing them because we want the other partner to love us the way we cannot love ourselves.
Yep.
And we put ourselves into a shame-based responses. And I think only if we become aware of that, it will be very helpful to get out of those fight, flight, freeze responses that are not helpful for the person. So
it sounds like you're talking about codependency relationships, Roman, where you're depending on somebody else for your own happiness. Like, you're making them responsible for whether you're happy or not. Like, I'm not happy because you did this or that. Like, it's nobody else's job to make you feel happy and fulfilled. That's your own job. And then you bring that to the table in your relationship. It's very unhealthy and considered codependency if you're putting your self-worth, your self-love, and your happiness in somebody else's hands.
Absolutely. So 4 ways traumas can negatively affect romantic relationships is getting triggered into traumatized states, getting into fight, flight, freeze response, then shame-based responses is the reflection of that, and then we go into rigid negative belief systems. Trauma can lead you to choose unhealthy partners and stay with them too long, and this is a hard time getting out of there if we're not conscious of what we're doing.
I think it goes back to the codependency thing. I think a lot of people don't have enough self-awareness to recognize that they're being codependent, and everything that they feel that they're lacking in the relationship. I mean, maybe they're lacking something, like maybe they need more communication and their partner's not capable of communicating. Then right. You might be in the wrong relationship. If communication is important to you and your partner is not capable of that, then you're not accepting them for who they are, where they're at right at that moment, and I don't know. I think it does go back to the whole thing you were talking about, Roman, with the codependency and staying in a relationship longer than you should be staying in because you're codependent on that person and you're basically playing the broken record over and over and over with them.
Right. So one thing that I see is that we have to recognize the signs of trauma bonds. Siara, do you want to read them? Can you read them, or you want Audra?
Are you there, Siara? I saw you talking to a wee one.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I was talking to Deja.
Can you read it?
Do you want to read the slide?
Oh, you want me to read it? Yes.
Yeah, if you can.
Signs of trauma bonds. 1, incessant obsessive focus on another person with fear of abandonment. Check, done that. 2, lack of boundaries, space, and clear autonomy. Check, done that. Tried to make myself who I thought people wanted me to be. 3, emotionally addictive cycles of being abandoned, rejected, and then chosen again. Oh man, yeah, I think a lot of us have been through that one. 4, fear of the person's reaction that creates secrecy and hiding behaviors. Yes, because you're afraid of not being perfect. 5, intense focus on sexual connection over authentic connection and communication. Yeah, that's a big one for a lot of people with trauma. Yeah, I used to call it trying to like plug the dam of my emotions with other people's bodies, and that sounds terrible. But anyways, let's see. 6, denying or hiding harmful behavior that might be alarming to those around you. Yes. 7, a strong desire to be comforted by the person who's causing severe emotional harm. And 8, a feeling of chronic self-doubt that you might be going crazy and denying your own reality, which can also be a factor in that a lot of times we choose people who are also emotionally unstable and they don't know how to deal with themselves or us either. So, yeah.
And it happens not only in a male-female relationships, it happens in any type of relationships, no matter gender, sex, or belief systems. It doesn't matter. As soon as you go into an emotional relationship with anything, and I would say even with a dog, from my perspective as a behaviorist, dog behaviorist, I see that people that avoid people and turn into dogs, they have the same pattern as they would have with another person. The difference is sometimes the dog is a better listener, but sometimes you don't get really the emotional feedback that you need, and you don't pick up on that. And thank you, Siara, for reading that out loud, because we are not conscious of that. We're not conscious of those patterns and of those signs that we are going through those trauma bonds, and we just live into them, and then we get convenient about that, and one fear to try something new where we're going to fail makes us stay and stuck in that relationship. So we continue that. It's safe to be in a situation that you know how you feel at some point, rather than going into this unknown future that may be the solution, but maybe not. So we are afraid to try that again because it's gonna things screwed up anyway. So we go into this negative thinking pattern until one day somebody shakes you out and says, "Hey, I see you. I love you for who you are, and I'm holding space for you. Now, what the heck is going on here?"
I'd like to point out that part of that is also a fear of success rather than failure. A lot of times in trauma minds, we already know how to fail. We know, it's been mentioned several times that we definitely fall back that we know. So we know how an unsuccessful relationship works. And so that's comfortable. But what if it succeeded? What would we do with that? Like, how would we then frame ourselves if we had a successful relationship with another individual on whatever level it may be, whether it's romantic or friendship or family? I know for me, there was a big moment where I had to process through my fear of success in relationships because I was terrified. What happened if I trusted this person for a few years or a few months or whatever? And what happens if things went wrong? And that was also, that was connected to a lack of faith in myself, in my decisions and my ability to overcome the tribulations that my life would have, which you would think by now I would have got that covered and be like, obviously I'm going to survive whatever comes my way because look how terrible things have been. But I still didn't have that ultimate feeling of trust in my own wings. There's that little saying about how the bird sits on the branch comfortably, not because it trusts the branch, but because it trusts its own wings if the branch were to break. And that was really something that I had to dig deep for. And that was very, very uncomfortable for me in the beginning, was to learn to trust myself. I kind of want to go back just a couple steps though to the codependent relationship thing and mention that there's a really fantastic book out there called The Mastery of Love. And that was the first book that really opened me up to the concepts that we were just talking about, in not giving my success or my love success away to other people. And I cried almost through that whole book because I felt like, why didn't anybody teach me this? It's a powerful, amazing, amazing book. And so I just want to throw that out there for anybody who's listening who may want to have some further reading on that.
The Mastery of Love.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Phenomenal book. Yeah.
So how do we get out of there? How do we heal those relationships? Where do we start? And where do we end on this one? Who likes to read out of there?
I'll read it.
Okay.
I feel like I'm in school again. Healing from trauma bonds includes.
Voice. Sorry.
What was that?
I like to hear your voice. You have kind of this soothing, healing voice right there. Kind of.
It's my hypnotherapy voice.
Gotcha.
Imagine yourself healing from the trauma bonds. Imagine yourself. Imagine yourself having clear boundaries. State our needs and allow someone to meet them. Have self-autonomy. Okay, I need to stop right there. Can someone tell me what that word means?
Which one?
The autonomy, is that about your body?
Autonomy, I think it's more the autonomous. Being autonomous comes from Greek autonomos, having your own rules and your own laws around yourself. Being your true self, I think.
Okay, so not like letting someone else dictate what's okay and what's not okay for yourself.
Self-autonomy is kind of a stupid word connections, because autonomy is self.
Okay.
So
all right.
Have autonomy and independence.
Okay, so have self-autonomy and independence rather than codependence. Find partners and friends in alignment with our highest self and highest values. Know our inherent self-worth and others who know their inherent self-worth. Escape the cycles of ancestral trauma. Discover relationships as a space for mutual evolution.
Thank you so much for reading it. I feel there are many factors that we have to. Why are you laughing?
Because I feel like I'm in school and you're the teacher and you're like, thank you for reading that, Audra.
I feel if we have a picture of what we're dealing with, it's easier for us to go into the process, because sometimes when we are triggered and we're going into a fight-flight response, we basically shut off thinking. So I know that some of us will watch that video, and by the end, if you ask the questions, what was your takeaway from here? Well, it was quite intense, period. But the takeaway wasn't taken away from there. It was just intense. I feel we're sharing our personal lives and pains and worries, and I get weepy just listening to you guys, because it's kind of like hearing myself talking, and I feel all of you at some point can associate and take one story of that. The only thing that changes is the time and the location, but the event is still the same. But the experience is individual for each individual person.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to take away from those relationships, even if that's sitting on that video and listening to us, it can save you a lot of time if you take away something. Only one thing, if you take away from that conversation, that will save you eventually a lifetime. Because if we're going through this incarnation process, we come over and over to heal ourselves and heal past trauma and ancestor trauma and even starseed trauma to go to the next level. Some people are here to heal collective trauma. If you don't start doing your own work and wait for the Messiah to come, he has done his work in the past, but he's come, or everything will come in the future. It's not about the future, it's not about the past, it's what you're doing right now, right here. And so I feel many people wait for some resolution and some magic to come in as like, now I feel changed, and do nothing about that. It's not going to work. It never worked. You can look at the history. By doing nothing, nothing will change. So
Right.
you're either on one side or you are on the other side, but you have to become somebody. So I remember from the Greek translations of old scripts, it says, stop being, I don't know how you want the word, a coffee that is not cold and not warm. What is it?
Lukewarm.
Yeah. So in Greece, we say hilaros, and we say, don't be like a lukewarm. Either be hot or cold, but you have to make a decision to do something about it. So doing nothing and being passive is the worst thing you can do, because you always go down by doing nothing. Just slowly, not so intense, but you'll go downer and downer. And if you wait for somebody to get you out, it's not going to work. You have to make the first move. And I
Yeah.
think, right? What do you guys think?
I think a good starting point for people that are kind of just starting their healing journey, or just becoming more aware that they have trauma that they haven't healed from or dealt with. I think a good starting point would be to just start asking yourself questions, without judgment. Just start asking yourself questions like, am I depending on somebody else for my happiness? Whose responsibility is my happiness? Is it the people around me's responsibility, or is it my own? What am I doing to better myself? Just start off with small questions to start bringing some awareness to yourself. I think a lot of people are in codependent relationships, and they keep repeating their trauma patterns because they literally don't have any self-awareness. They have zero awareness that they're even doing it. So just start asking small questions, and it will help your awareness begin to grow.
And don't be codependent even with your therapist. I see this all the time. I see it as a healer, because I do also healing work with people and dogs. But I see people hire me because they want to be codependent with me. Let him do the work, so I don't need to do that. Let the dog change, so I don't need to do the work. Let the therapist deal with my problem, and repeating, and I'm coming in again and again and got stuck with my therapist for years. It becomes a codependent relationship, and it becomes not a healing, it becomes a re-traumatizing, and eventually a slow healing. But you have to live on those relationships. You have to,
I hear what you're saying, Roman. A lot of people tend to go into therapy or any modality of healing, Reiki energy, reconnective therapy, any modality. People might be going in with a mindset that it is the other person's job to heal you. That is not the truth. It's the other person's job to create a loving and safe place for you to heal yourself. So if you're depending on someone else to heal you, they can't do your work for you. They cannot do your work for you. That's something that you have to do for yourself.
And I encourage all the therapists to eventually end up watching that video. If you see a codependent client, you have to raise the flags and says, hey, you're not here for me to heal you. I'm here just to show you the path, but you have to walk that freaking path because I'm not one detouring you. And of course,
Yeah.
it's money making because you're coming here every month and you have this consistency. I'm kind of like on your payroll, but that's not what a healer is here for. A healer should have a
No,
healing process.
a
It's
good
not,
healer
it's not,
would tell you.
you know.
Yeah.
And Siara is a healer. Audra is a healer. I am a healer, and we need healers as well because sometimes we have hard time pinning points out or finding those triggers. And I use Barbara sometimes. Says Barbara, I have this issue going on. I don't know what to do with it. And she's like, okay, let me check in on that. And she's like, you know what? I'm too biased for it. But also, being too long in a relationship with the same therapist, it becomes biased. It becomes kind of a routine. Hey, how was your day? Oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And before the person's opened his mouth, the therapist knows already what's going to come out. That's wrong. And that has to be addressed. So if we choose any modalities, no matter what modality it is, we have always to come in from an angle. What's my goal today? If I'm done with that session, where do I want to be tomorrow? And how much work am I willing to put into the consideration? And how much work do I put on my back so I'm not reaching my goal? Like creating this upper limit so low that I don't even fit underneath. Like getting too busy with work, getting too busy with kids, getting too busy with serving my partner because he needs to heal because I am a healer and I want him to not be suffering. So I take the burden on me and sponging that trauma that he has so this person doesn't need to get through it. And some healers even go there and sponge the client's trauma and not helping them heal because they kind of like try to do that by force on their side. What do you think, Siara? I mean, you see that because you guys do healing retreats and all this stuff. How do you see that? By the way,
It's a fine
that was
balance.
tell us about your healing retreat that's coming up soon. I'm very interested because I would definitely join that. If it's not too early to talk about it.
So,
Oh, good job, Roman. Way to spill the beans.
About what?
He said if it's not too early to talk about it, but he already spilled the beans. It's too late now. Now you have to tell us.
It's a fine balance in a relationship with two healers to not be in charge of the other person's healing. And I think I kind of have a different perspective on it because my partner is pretty established in a lot of communities and he's really well known and he's helped a lot of people. And so when we go to conferences and stuff that he's speaking at, I tend to get a lot of, I don't know, it feels like flack to me where people are like, oh, it must be so amazing to be with Eric. Like he can keep you so balanced with all of your trauma and stuff. And I'm like, right, except for when we're like mirroring our trauma to each other and we're working through stuff. Like it's fantastic, you know, like I feel like people kind of diminish anyways, that's a whole other story. So it's kind of a balance. And honestly, I kind of wanted to come back to the slide that we just did with the ancestral trauma. And I just wanted to kind of mention that there is, yes, number 6, ancestral trauma. And this particular slide does not include transgenerational trauma patterns. Which are different than ancestral trauma, but kind of similar. And in the spiritual community, I know we do a lot of focus on ancestral or DNA clearings or genetic clearings, things like that. And I think that sometimes it forgets that we have what's called transgenerational trauma patterns, which are different. That's where, like, for instance, my father was a Vietnam veteran, and the way that he approached friendships and life, we were always helping people, and there was always somebody like that was in need, and my parents were always these big rescuers. But at the end of that rescue, things went one of two ways. They either
She's frozen.
That's the transgenerational trauma right there.
Oh man.
So
She needs to unfreeze because I want to hear what she has to say.
Me too. Let's make a short break for some people who want to close but want to listen. In case you guys don't know what you're at here.
Audra and Roman inviting guests and holding space to discuss the healing journey to reunite with our true selves.
Back with you guys.
Siara.
Where is Siara? We lost Siara. Good. You know what? My coffee is over. And we're shared already for an hour our knowledge and our experiences. And Audra and Siara had so much.
And Roman.
Yeah, right. Thank you for telling me. Yeah, I have to add that to the equation. Sharing that is not, it's not because we want to, show ourselves up, like how good we are that we reach to that goal. I want everybody to be able to go through this.
I think we're just, like you said, we're not just sharing to hear ourselves talk. We're trying to show our own path and our experience to maybe help other people see themselves. Like they might be able to relate to our story, or might be able to relate to how we feel about something. And sometimes they might not be able to articulate it, or they don't really understand what it is. But then when they hear it, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, 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 yes. And, so I think we're sharing our stories, our personal experiences for that reason. And also we're trying to provide maybe some tips or tools, some avenues where you can begin your own journey on healing through different experiences. Like this particular conversation is about trauma bonds. And hopefully, like Roman said earlier, hopefully you are taking away something from this, not just saying, oh, that was, like really intense or whatever your thoughts are around the conversation. But hopefully there's something that we've offered you here that you're going to take away, and something that you're going to use to expand your own life, to evolve your own experience.
Yeah, I feel we should look for, okay, you were saying.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what happened. My computer just had to be hard reset, and it's
Too much energy going in there.
So what I was saying was transgenerational trauma patterns are a little bit different than ancestral clearings that we do. And what that is, for instance, my dad was a Vietnam vet. And so the way that him and my mother approached relationships was really not healthy. They just really kind of didn't work through things with people, which we talked about previously, just earlier in this conversation about how like I didn't do well with like people having conflict with me and for a long time. And what that did to me though was it set my thermostat differently, and it gave me a patterned way of being in this lifetime now. And I have passed that on in part to my children who did not experience the trauma. I didn't experience the trauma either, but because of the relationship patterns and the life patterns I learned from my parents, the way that their trauma affected their lives, it affected me and my strategies and tools. And it impacted impacted my children's lives, the way that they approach things in schools and stuff. And so as much healing work as we do, sometimes, you know, you're watching your kids start to play out some of these other trauma connections and things like that, and you're looking at them and they haven't experienced the trauma, they didn't even come into contact with the person who has the trauma, and yet here it is moving down the generational line because of the patterning that we're taught, the lifestyles that we're given, the way that we are. We have a really lovely friend on the chat who, you know, the cultural things that get passed down that we don't even realize how they impact us and affect our ability, and how they color our world and tint everything that we do, and that we have to become aware of those things. And so that's like a really powerful thing. When I came across this concept, it was actually in conjunction with a study I was doing on racism. And I hadn't really appreciated how much my parents and my grandparents' traumas and the way that they approached life had impacted me, even though I did not experience those traumas.
Yeah.
And I had a whole different set of life skills. And so I just feel like it's an important distinction, and that some of us need to be aware that it's not just so much just clearing out the DNA or the genetic patterns. It's actually becoming focused on what our life patterns are and building in new skills and new tools that are often very uncomfortable in order to better ourselves. So sometimes it's not as easy as like a simple clearing. We have to still go out there and do the legwork, you know?
Thank you so much for sharing, guys. I think we captured pretty much a lot of things.
Yep.
We captured, let me go through quickly. We captured, obviously, negative patterns in relationships. We talked about dynamics of trauma bonds. We discussed about red flags and how do we see them. We discussed about ways that we can, with the trauma, negatively affect us. We also discussed about signs of trauma bonds. How would you recognize those? And then finally, how do we get out of that situation? Also, we talked about generational trauma, and thank you, Siara, for pointing that out. I feel we did capture everything, right? So
Yeah,
for
I
you
think
guys,
so.
viewers who wants to be part of our conversation here, you're welcome to send us a private message and says, hey guys, I would love to share my story. I'm ready for it, just like Siara did. And share your story and kind of learn from that. What do you guys think?
Yep. I definitely think that if anyone's interested on being a part of one of our discussions, to reach out to one of us, and let's make that happen.
Good. Thank you so much for having you guys here and having me here in our group of 3 today. And looking forward to see you next time.
In close, Roman
Yes.
spilling the beans. Siara, do you want to share about the conference?
Oh, our retreat.
Yeah, just in closing, share that retreat information.
Yes, thank you. So Eric and I have run a yearly retreat for the last 4 years. It's an immersive retreat. So we start in the morning every day with a yoga and meditation pattern that's the same all week. So you can take it home with you and either add it in or use it as a foundation to build from for your own personal practice. Every day we do, in the afternoons, we do energy work, and we have a workshop portion where people work on themselves and each other. We have a day where we do trauma release exercises, which is a really profound day. We have, the retreat's amazing. So it's in McLeod, right next to Mount Shasta in California. We stay in this little adorable mercantile and have a gorgeous, amazing spot for nighttime fire ceremonies. We all come in We keep our group purposely small. It's always under 33 people. We do that on purpose because we want people to be able to have time to build impactful relationships with others. So not only do we keep our group small and intimate, but we build in a lot of time throughout the week for natural bonds and friendships to happen, because we've always personally been really disappointed when we go to places and then we just feel like we get run through the ringer all week. And so, every day there's a big lunch break where we all take food and go on adventures together. And then there's a break in the evenings before the fireside ceremony.
What are the dates?
This year, the dates are August 9th through the 17th. So we check in on the 9th. The workshops begin on Monday and run through Sunday, and then everybody will check out on the 17th.
And how many more slots do you have left?
We have, for sale tickets, we have probably 11 or somewhere right around 11 to 13 more tickets.
Okay. And Roman said he put the link to get a hold of you if anyone's interested in that in the comments. Is that what you did, Roman?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a really, it's profound. People come away from it changed. Barbara and Roman have been coming since, I believe, the first one. We have a really amazing core group of people, and they come every year because it's really a huge reset to be able to be immersed in this wonderful energy. And Eric, oh my God, he does the most amazing job. Yeah, and he works on people. He's a massage therapist, so he also helps to unlock people's bodies during the retreat. And we do a lot of, like I said, yoga and stretching. And we're both licensed massage therapists. Who have a deep and abiding love for, the way that our bodies hold trauma and helping people to release that. We have other people coming in with gifts. Roman's going to run a portion of it this year. I can't, what was the topic you're going to run this year?
Synergistic healing with animals. Oops.
Yeah.
It's a lot of beans being spilled here.
Yeah, so he's going to run a portion of one of the afternoons, and it's amazing. Last year, we had some people show up that had a really hard time with energy work and with letting go, and so Eric and I, in the middle of the week, reorganized and regrouped. And when I was a kid, I used to play energy games with my brothers, and we ended up playing a bunch of those games as a group, and it was one of the most fun afternoons I think I've ever had with a group of adults in my whole life. Like, we stuck pennies to the wall, we lifted people with 2 fingers, we just did like everyday magic stuff, and it was fantastic. And we like had giant chi ball fights, like we were having a snowball fight. Like, it was really a lot of fun. We take one afternoon off to Eric and I always plan one afternoon to be completely free, and we go out and we rent kayaks or paddle boards, or we rent something and we go play, usually on water, and then we just let the afternoon organically unfold. And it's usually towards the end of the week so that everybody's already familiar with each other. And we, one year we did a giant Om ceremony on a stone by a river. Last year we did paddle boarding and kayaking. This year I don't know what the adventure is going to be, because to be perfectly honest, I'm as surprised as everybody else that I'm having my retreat this year. So, yeah, it's amazing though. If anybody's interested, we also have payment options, and I have the dates ready for next year if anybody wants to do a big payment plan for next year's or anything like that, or if anybody needs help. I have broken down the tickets this year to be more affordable for everybody, since we are in the middle of the Rona-teen, as I like to call it. And so I've broken it down to be the absolute most affordable it can be. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure this year. We are not catering it. There's options for tickets, solo rooms, shared rooms, which are super cheap and actually cheaper than the Airbnbs in the area. and also an option without a room for people that want to go camping and stuff. And this isn't usually how we do our ticketing, by the way. This is an exceptional year, and we are allowing this year to flow as necessary to bring as many people together for this healing work as possible. So yeah, so if anybody's interested, you can find me on Facebook. We run our business through unleashingnaturalhumanity.com. Eric Rains is a speaker, and he's really open. Like, he friends a lot of people. I am still trying to only friend people that message me, but some days I fail at that. And anyways, but it's a fantastic, and we have a great group of people coming this year. And I kind of feel like this year is going to be as tremendous as our first year, where I feel like we're all being siren songed into it, where I feel this year is going to be really special. I feel it in my bones. I know it. It's going to probably be our best year yet. And so come join us.
Thanks for sharing all that info.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining everyone today. My dog wants to go out. I need to get him out. So
Okay.
Close. So thank you so much again for being here. Any questions in the comments? Siara will monitor if you guys have any questions about the retreat. And see you in 2 weeks from now, right?
Yes.
Well, it depends on how.
Yeah, let's see. Pay attention, saying, like the page so you get updates, and follow the page so you get all the updates and all the information that you guys need. Thank you so much for today, and see you next time.
Audra and Roman inviting
Bye,
guests
guys.
and
Thanks for
holding
joining
space
us.
to discuss the healing journey to reunite with our true selves.